What's up? Welcome back, hopefully. So, we're gonna dig straight into the first episode of Project Blue Book, the Fuller Dogfight. So, the show opens over Fargo, North Dakota, with two pilots from, I believe it's the 178th Air National Guard Fighter Squadron, doing what pilots do. If you're unfamiliar, that's flying. They were flying in planes. They pilot planes. P-51s, in fact, if you were curious, or even if you weren't. Anyway, one peels off, the other buzzes a high school football game cheering for the Titans, which is the team from Trinity High School in Dickinson, North Dakota. That's what I found on the interwebs. So if that is wrong, somebody let me know in the comments. But the interweb would never lie to my face, I don't think. Then things go a bit sideways. Over the headset, let's see, where are we at here? Yeah, the headset, there's a San Diego radio station that gets tuned in, which is weird because the pilot headset should be just like a radio chatter frequency. Right after which, a greenish light kind of whips by the plane. Pilot calls out to the tower to see if there's any other air traffic in the area and gets a negative confirmation. The light comes back to the plane, and the pilot engages. Seems a bit irresponsible to send large caliber bullets zipping over the U.S. airspace, where they can travel into who knows where and who knows how far, coming to eventually come into the ground. You know, whatever. Potentially through people and property. Also, he doesn't really even let ground control know that there's a situation to, get directions on what he should be doing. Whether or not he should be engaging, for example, which is outside of typical military protocol, especially near a military installation. But, it's a TV show. Get it. Which, let's talk about the effects just real quick before we move on. This opening scene for the entire show is great. The effects are legit. The hue that they use for the green is fairly unique in terms of color selection. I'm not super familiar with that particular color, but it's definitely the same green that was used in the promotional photos of the cast that were released before the show's debut. Okay, back to what was happening. So the plane gets, for lack of better terminology here, tractor beamed as How High the Moon by Les Paul and Mary Ford comes in over the pilot's comms. And then this kind of results in a plane crash. Before the wreck, we transition to a group of high military ranking government people assembled, apparently by President Truman, watching a scene from The Day the Earth Stood Still, which, by the way, is a classic sci-fi movie. And I didn't mind the remake with Keanu Reeves either. We're informed that there are 15 more being made in Hollywood. Which 15? It's kind of hard to say. The Day the Earth Stood Still came out in 1951. Between 52 and 53, there were other sci-fi sort of classic movies like It Came from Outer Space, The Lost Planet, The War of the Worlds. Other known, more of cult fan favorites were things like Project Moonbase, Phantom from Space, Invaders from Mars, Zombies of the Stratosphere, yes, Red Planet Mars, and Radar Men from the Moon. They all kind of came out around the same time. I mean, it's completely period coherent to say that there was probably that many movies coming out. I mean, Hollywood is banging them out. And this was on the ass end of the Universal monster movies, which were super popular going into the 40s, into the 50s, and then it kind of rolled into this crazy sci-fi thing as Hollywood got better, and so completely period appropriate. And it kind of makes sense. I mean, they saw ticket sales, going through the roof. American moviegoers were chomping at the bit for these movies because it was still a relatively new novelty after the Great Depression and World War II, movies, not sci-fi movies. I mean, it was all novelty, really. And because of the new sort of shared social experience it presented at the time, it was the thing to do. Radio dramas were still popular. They're having started a few decades earlier, but they were more of a personal experience. They could be one person, a family, or just a few friends. Movies, or rather movie theaters, were wildly different than they are now. There was talking, shouting, oohing, ahhing. We kind of shun that stuff today. But at the time, everybody just kind of let themselves be wowed by the magic unfolding on the screen in front of them. We're just way too cynical now. So people have to walk in and immediately pass critiques and judgment on things. I think critics mistakenly think that the word critic is derived from critical instead of critique. And people have this inability now to just kind of walk in and enjoy a movie for what it is. That wasn't a thing then. Everyone went to the movies just because it was a movie, not because they had an agenda or they needed to, see something that reaffirmed some predisposed bias that they had about whatever it is. This isn't to say that those films weren't good. I'm not saying that. Some of them were great, and some were total crap. But
it was what it was. I think of it as the early days of the internet. People were just astounded by what movies could do. If you go back and look at AOL chat rooms now, really, it was all trash. But it served a purpose to get us to where we are now. Which is in a conference room. I total side diatribe. Location unspecified, but we'll find out where it's at in later episodes. By the way, I've watched ahead. I'm putting these out about 4 TV episodes behind because, it takes time to research all the stuff. I have to go through scene by scene, pull everything out, research it. So it took a little bit longer than I thought it would. Okay, so one of the generals, Neil McDonough's character, makes a statement that I found pretty bold, especially in the very first show of your TV series. We don't even know what we're dealing with. Let Hollywood be the distraction. In the previous cast, I drew several parallels with the X-Files. And let's make no mistake, there is a clear feeling the way this show sets up the atmosphere and the paranoia to the X-Files. But we're being told in no uncertain terms, in the first 3 minutes, the government is not behind this. Now, it's behind other stuff, which we'll get to, but not behind this. They don't even know what it is. They are simply trying to cover it up to keep Americans from becoming insanely paranoid. That is a huge departure from the X-Files, where the government was basically behind everything mythology. Well, presumably. It all kind of got a bit messy in there, didn't it? Okay, so now we jump to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. McDonough pulls up to a building off of flight line, which is a bit weird. In prior Air Force, I know how bases get laid out, and not everything is right off the flight line. And typically, desk jockeys, even though they may have once been pilots, don't get an office on the flight line. It's kind of, it's whatever. Again, it's a TV show. I'm sticking to the wrong details here. My bad. McDonough rolls into the office that has alien drawings, flying saucer newspaper clippings, and other creepy shit, and has the same general reaction when he sees it that I think pretty much anyone would. It's one of those split-second, what the fuck looks. Right before he reestablishes his composure, Michael Malarkey walks in. In a few sentences, we get established, for us, the character's kind of ambitions. We're talking about Michael Malarkey here. He wants to go to Washington, D.C. He wants to get promoted there, which we'll find as the series moves on is why he's so anxious to close the cases. There's other reasons, but that is the driving factor for him as a person. As a captain in the Air Force, that is his driving motivation in the series as we know it starting out. And that's what he wants to do. He wants to close them out the cases out as fast as possible so he can get promoted to the White House. We're also given this sort of quick summary of Aidan Gillen's character before we go to Ohio State University in Columbus to meet him to help finish out our initial show premise, which is pretty succinct. They lay out basically everything from North Dakota to Ohio with the military, with the civilians, situation, what we know, what we don't, the attitude and atmosphere at the time, all within about 5-6 minutes of the episode. which gives the show a good amount of time to flex with the core storytelling for the remainder of the episode, which is dope! Okay, so let me set my excitement aside for just a second. I'm going to step away. I'm going to calm down.
I'm kind of glad I stopped there. When I did the first prelim edits, for some reason Audacity just started dropping the pitch of my voice, made me sound like I was going into slow motion. But I left it, screw it, whatever. Alright, so we left off, Hynek opens with this pretty fantastic futuristic speech, something that we kind of already know to be past tense, but the board members he's talking to in a 1952 setting kind of see it as pure ridiculous fantasy. I think it's fairly obvious trope, kind of clues viewers in to Hynek's intellect, because we know he's right, because what he's saying has already happened for us. But even though it's a trope, I think it's one for a reason, and I appreciate how well it's used here. People often cite tropes in like this bad context, but I don't always feel that way. At least if they're used correctly, tropes are totally fine. They serve a purpose because the trope can reach back on all the movie and TV history we've ever known, watched, and gotten accustomed to, and just quick use of a proper trope, it kind of sets the mood and puts us exactly where we need to be as viewers. So to highlight how the board feels, we get a glimpse of a Flash Gordon comic from 1952, and it looks like an issue 1. When I was looking it up online, I actually tried to buy it. I think you can get it for $9 on eBay, but that was like the day the show aired, so I'm sure it's probably going up in price now. Anyway, so the one I tried to get looked like an issue 1, but like with most comic runs, there's several issue 1s. So this happened to be an issue 1 from 1952. I don't know if it'll drive the value up, but maybe. Shortly after, Hynek is pulled from the meeting to talk to Captain Quinn, which, reminder, that's Michael Malarkey's character. I don't know if that was specified earlier. That's the reason I said it. So they cut to the quick and they give us this synopsis of what Project Blue Book, the actual Project Blue Book, not the show, is about, along with a convenient clarification on what created the terminology. Quinn talks to Hynek kind of just talks him into coming aboard, plays to his ego, which was a tip that the general gave him. And we transition to Hynek at home. We find out that he does crave recognition in his own lifetime, which I don't think anyone who's ever done anything doesn't want that. Maybe on a different scale, but it's a very simple, very relatable motivation that I think allows us as viewers to kind of empathize with him. At his home, we meet Laura Mennel's character, Mimi Hynek. I gushed over how beautiful she was kind of in the last, or I guess the first episode of the Fancast. But I think part of it is also that how the women dressed in that era. I'm not like a fashionista by any stretch. Basically wear hoodies and shorts and that's it. But there are very few eras where women's fashion just was amazing. And even as a guy, I can appreciate that. Today's fashions are pretty revealing and, I mean, if we're being honest, fairly forgettable. None of this has this, none of the stuff that women wear now or choose to be fashionable or provocative or whatever has that sort of iconic sensibility that 50s fashion had to it. There's a certain stateliness with women's fashion from, like, let's say the 1800s, Victorian London. Amazing, right? Like, I don't expect women to go out and dress like that now. It would be weird. But when you see it, you're like, damn, that looks good. Like, even as a guy, that looks good. The Roaring '20s in New York, I think, is probably another time frame where women just, the clothing really, I don't know, made them look amazing. And then, obviously, we're in 50s post-war World War America. That was, and guys, I think, have the same thing. We dress like trash now, but guys in the 50s, they cared, I guess is the only way to put it. There's just something in the way women presented themselves that was wildly attractive. And Laura wears that fashion style really well in the show. I mean, whoever did her outfits, great, just did a great job. We also find out in this scene that neither Jay Allen or Mimi actually believe in flying saucers, which I think is pretty important to the story being told here. In real life, Professor J. Allen Hynek did not believe in UFOs in the beginning when he came aboard Project Sign and then Project Blue Book for the exact reasons Captain Quinn spun in the previous scene where they were together, to instill rational thinking into the American consciousness. So Hynek, as he's leaving, we get our first bit of paranoia introduced to the show in the form of someone watching him leave from a parked car that pulls up to follow Quinn and Hynek as they leave. Roll intro. I already had to take a break before we even got to the intro. That's crazy. That is a solid opening for a show, though. I mean, it didn't even register the titles hadn't played because I was sucked in. This is it's really strong storytelling. Now, I talked about the writer and showrunner in the previous cast, but as strong as the writing is, it would not be possible to hook viewers if you had bad piece of direction. In the director's chair is Robert Stromberg. If you aren't familiar with that name, maybe you're familiar with like Avatar, Alice in Wonderland, 2 films that he got back-to-back awards for because of his work on them. Now, he didn't direct them, obviously, but he got to work side by side with Hollywood legends. I imagine you pick up a few things when you work with people of that caliber. Other projects he was kind of a part of was Maleficent, Master and Commander, Life of Pi, The Hunger Games, Wall Street, Where Money Never Sleeps, or Wall Street. Is it Wall Street Where Money, or is it Wall Street Money Never Sleeps? Money Never Sleeps. That's what it is. Shutter Island, 3:10 to Yuma, There Will Be Blood, and like on the TV side, Game of Thrones, The Pacific. I mean, dude, just look at the guy's IMDb. It is out of control, the number of awesome things he's attached to. It just like goes on. So you have great actors, a legendary producer, a well-seasoned showrunner, and a director who's attached to more household name movies and TV shows than it's reasonable to even list on here, with a novice writer who was highlighted as the guy to watch. Amazing. And that intro song is pretty perfect. I really dug it. After the credits, we roll up to the Air National Guard base in Fargo and talk with LT Fuller. By the way, the name of that pilot was Lieutenant Fuller. Here, we kind of get our first glimpse into the Quinn-Hynek dynamic. It's not the same as the Mulder-Scully dynamic, which was where like one is a believer and one is a skeptic. Here, they're both skeptics. But Hynek looks at LT Fuller as like a credible witness due to his military training and his background. This is something that would become like a major piece of what would eventually be ufology. The trained witness. Police officers, prior military pilots, their stories are given a level of credibility by their training, because of their training, I guess I should say, whenever they do ufology reports with groups like MUFON or like NICAP, to slip in another X-Files reference. Quinn just writes Fuller off as a quack with no credibility because he claims to have seen an alien ship. Okay, so who is LT Fuller? Well, turns out, not a real dude. Well, I mean, okay, he is, but Captain Henry Fuller is buried in Gettysburg and depressingly has this is a quote, one of the least visited markers in Gettysburg National Military Park. Now, how does anyone even know that? I don't know, but it's sad. So yeah, not that guy. But he is based on a real dude. Real dude's name is actually George Gorman. And the actual incident he had was on October 1st, 1948. And you can go to https://ufoseekers.com/1948-gorman-dogfight/ for more details on that. Little reading here from Wikipedia, though. Gorman told the tower that he was going to pursue the object to determine its identity. He moved his Mustang. So before we go any further, Fuller at the beginning of the episode did not even report the object. So you can see here what I was talking about. Gorman reports the object, and then before he takes any action, decides to pursue it to determine what it is. That's proper procedure. All right. He moved his Mustang to full power, 350 to 400 miles per hour, but soon realized the object was going too fast for him to catch in a straight run. Instead, he tried cutting the object off by turns. He made a right turn and approached the object head-on at 5,000 feet. The object flew over his plane at a distance of about 500 feet. Gorman described the object as a ball of light, about 6 to 8 inches in diameter. He also noted later that when the object increased its speed, it stopped blinking and grew brighter. Now, if you remember, if you go back to the beginning of the episode, you can actually see that thing when it speeds up. It does get brighter in the episode, which is very cool. They paid attention to those small details like that. After his near collision, Gorman lost sight of the object. When he saw it again, it appeared to have made a 100-degree turn and was coming at him again. The object then made a sudden vertical climb. Gorman followed the object in his own steep climb. At 14,000 feet, his P-51 stalled. The object was still 2,000 feet above him. Gorman made two further attempts to get closer to the object with no success. It seemed to make another head-on pass, but broke off before coming close to his fighter. By this point, the object had moved over the Fargo airport. In the control tower, the air traffic controller, L.D. Jensen, viewed the object through binoculars but could see no form or shape around the light. He was joined by Dr. Cannon and his passenger from the Piper Club. They had landed and walked to the control tower to get a better view of the object. Now, so that piece was left out of the TV show episode. It's better to have just a single person that you cannot verify, or, you know, makes it harder to verify. Now, if they had multiple witnesses, it would have, I don't know. I mean, it still would have made a good story, I think, but I think the way they did it in the show makes for better storytelling with the story they're trying to kind of lay out for us, where everything can both be proved and disproved. And you'll see that going along. They don't take easy ways out on this storytelling. I love that they do that. All right, so Gorman continued to follow the object approximately 25 miles southwest of Fargo. At 14,000 feet, he observed the light at 11,000 feet. Then he dived on the object at full power. However, the object made a vertical climb. Gorman tried to pursue, watched the object pass out of visual range. At this point, he broke off the chase. That was approximately 9:27 p.m., and he flew back to Fargo's Hector Airport. Now, according to Gorman, this is Gorman, so, quote, "I am convinced there was a definite thought behind its maneuvers. I am further convinced that the object was governed by the laws of inertia because its acceleration was rapid but not immediate, and although it was able to turn fairly tight and at considerable speed, it still followed a natural curve. When I attempted to turn with the object, I blacked out temporarily due to excessive speed. I am in fairly good physical condition and do not believe that there are many, if any, pilots that could withstand the turn at the speeds affected by the object and remain conscious. The object was not only able to turn and outspeed my aircraft, but it was able to attain a far steeper climb and was able to maintain a constant rate of climb far in excess of my aircraft." So, I mean, that does not sound like a guy who's crazy. That's Gorman, not Fuller. But that doesn't sound like somebody who's crazy. So with the opening scene, I feel like it's pretty faithful to that account in as much as they can be in such a short period of time. Walking into the hangar, we see Fuller's plane and a bunch of people in full chem gear running something over the plane. Hynek attempts to engage LT Fuller, but Quinn is the one that gets a response from him by, quote-unquote, speaking the same language. We find out Fuller's call sign is Cooper, as in Gary Cooper, and I guess that he's a womanizer, according to Quinn, based on the call sign. I'm not sure how, I don't know. Anyway, so Quinn suggests Hynek check out the plane since Fuller seems to be responding to him and not Hynek. As it turns out, this plays to both of their strengths. Hynek is stopped before the plane and informed, we, not just Hynek, as audience, were also informed that the radiation levels are too high. This is another bit clipped from UFO lore here. Airmen well, presumably an airman, tries to stop Hynek and fails to provide a clear answer as to the level of radiation. So Hynek schools the son of a bitch, because he's a professor. I guess bad joke, I guess. Now here we get a pretty cool bit of contrast between Fuller telling Quinn the story and Hynek going into, like, I don't know what you would call this, Hynek vision. He's taken in the damage from the plane, sitting in the cockpit, and seemingly imagining the events as they played out without hearing Fuller's story. Okay, time to dial back the tension a bit. So Mimi's out shopping. So we cut from, like, real super close in on Hynek's face to Mimi shopping. Here we go. We get a taste of that sort of Mad Men vibe that the show's creators referred to with the 50s advertising. Tacky, but appropriate for the time, and I think it helps to sell the period feel for the show. Because moms love the Hoover upright. Oh, that's so bad. It's just a terrible ad. Apparently there was enough to pull, that sign was apparently enough to pull Mimi into Hales. Or maybe it was a dress, I don't know. Hales was a department store out of, if the interwebs is to be believed, Sacramento, California, that would eventually fold into Macy's. Another nice little time period touch there by using their old name. Good touch, not a bad touch. Not that I'm entirely opposed to the bad touch, I guess. If it's Laura Mental, that's fine. If it's an alien anal probe, probably in the not fine category, I think. The song playing is as Mimi walks in. I couldn't find it, so if you know the song, please drop it in the comments. I was not able to soundhound it, or Spotify it wouldn't come up for me, so sorry about that. As Mimi is trying on some lipstick, this blonde walks in, checks her out with some let's scissor action in her eyes. Maybe not. Maybe that's just me kind of projecting. But, what is it? Cassina? I'm not sure how you say her name. Solo. She's pretty amazing, too. The actress, I'm talking about the actress now, the blonde. I'm telling you, man, that 50s women's style, there's just something super classy about it. Maybe it's just because they don't show off all the goods. I don't know. Don't get me wrong, like, both of these women are beautiful, but I've seen them in some other stuff. What was Cassina? Lost Girl? Orphan Black? Is that right? I think so. And she's gorgeous there, too. But there's just something about the way she's dressed. It's just that time period. Plus, she's Russian. I don't know. I just find Russian women pretty striking. I need to rein that shit in. But as the scene moves forward, so we're talking about Mimi and Cassina. Her character's name is Susie. Took me a second. They become pretty fast friends over lipstick and men's ties. This is the 50s. Now, here is something I think that is, well, I mean, it's bad. But it's reflective of the time period, and I don't think people talk about it. They want to get hung up on the big ticket issues, but remember when Mimi walked in and the advert was talking about how much moms loved Hoovers? Well, in the 50s, it was a man's world, and a woman's place was at home. Now, I'm not one of those people that goes on rants about patriarchal society, and women's equal treatment and suffrage or anything like that. But on a more subtle note, Mimi clearly needs a friend. The way Laura delivers that sort of vulnerability without being needy is very delicate acting. I could really appreciate it. And I think it's very true for a lot of women, not just women in the 50s, but at least up through the 80s. During the 80s, women really began to push themselves into the workforce, and it changed a lot of different social aspects. But I think I can really understand where Mimi's at, even though, like, I'm one of those hated white males that everybody loves to demonize today. But my mom was a military spouse, and she got dragged around the world. She did not get the luxury of having friends. There was no internet then. And so you couldn't even get like this false impression of friendship. She was just alone all day until my dad came home. sometimes with the kids during the summer, but mostly not. It's a kind of isolation that I don't think anybody under 30 in America can really understand now with our constant digital connectivity. But I mean, yeah, there were phones, but the phone calls overseas were so expensive, and she didn't have friends on base. I don't know. It's a financial necessity, so even phone calls were super rare. You might do letters, like the old school archaic, like handwritten letters. I don't know, but maybe I'm just reading more into this because of what I watched my mom go through while I was a kid. And then, like, kind of matrixing my own experience on top of Laura's performance. But it definitely struck a chord with me. So, I don't know. I feel like they really represented that sort of subtle kind of alone thing that was happening at that time. But now we bounce back to Fargo. We get a logical, scientific explanation of why planes can be radioactive from Professor Hynek. And this is another part of the show I absolutely love. They present the scenario and do a great job of laying out two sides. These... okay. There are these completely plausible explanations, but some things that just don't quite add up at the same time. That is a hard line to walk as a writer. And I've got to think, depending on how many seasons this show is, there's no way they can continue to dance on that tightrope. At some point, as a writer, you're going to have too many experiences for your characters leaning one way or the other that the story has to start becoming one-sided. I mean, that's just the progression of like every show in the history of shows. Hynek then poses a question while creating some of the modern terminology we all will come to know and associated with the little gray men, UFOs. But the question is a valid one and leads Quinn to present a simple answer, reaching back to 1947. So what caused the accident? A weather balloon. Now, I think because of pop culture, people are inclined to kind of scoff at the idea of a weather balloon. Even maybe predisposed to scoff at it at this point. Frankly, I think it's because most people don't know what a weather balloon really is. They think it's insane that a balloon could wreck a plane or be mistaken for a UFO. And David O'Leary could have taken the easy way out, like a lot of writers here, but he doesn't. He goes through having our protagonists explain the event in a very plausible way. Not only that, Robert Stromberg makes sure to show us the parts of the weather balloon that are completely capable of the kind of damage that the plane had. And right on the heels of taking the hard road, O'Leary turns around and takes an even harder road by taking his skeptic character in Hynek and making him understand that even though he doesn't believe in UFOs, even though the weather balloon theory is logical, something mathematically does not make sense to him in terms of the lightings and illumination. So he turns to his ally science and provides some legs to the theory to either accept or reject it. That's a tough writing decision. It's not an easy way out. We find here that Hynek isn't just a skeptic, but he's also a truth seeker. It has to be hard. Like, the guy has to have incontrovertible facts for him. There is no wiggle room. Now, I'm not a scientist, but I imagine that this is a trait a lot of scientists probably have. It's what makes them scientists and the rest of us, well, us. We're willing to leave wiggle room so long as the answer is what we want it to be, whether that is UFOs, cryptozoology, science, politics, relationships, economics, video games, whatever. People in general come to their answer and then they find stuff to support their answer and ignore anything that contradicts what they don't want to hear. Or I guess it's anything that contradicts what they do want to hear. Whatever. Hynek, however, is a hard science man. He's not willing to accept explanations at face value until he can verify it. In less than a minute, we get two hard writing decisions that could have totally been easy ways out. It's awesome. Okay, so now we just got to remember that there's other characters in the show. So we're going to bounce back to Mimi and Susie, chit in the chat, and we get this very quick question from Susie to Mimi after she mentions that Joseph's got a second job. Or is it Alan? Should I call him Joseph or Alan or Hynek? Mimi's also a Hynek, so I don't know. I'll go with Alan. from now on. Inconsequential at the time and brushed off quickly. This is the question. But on rewatching, it's a nice setup for what comes later. And we're quickly back to Quinn and Hynek at the diner getting pie, which, I love pie. So I can appreciate that. Coffee and pie. I used to live in North Bend, Washington, and I used to go to the diner where they filmed Twin Peaks and also was the setting for Alan Wake. Coffee and pie. Delicious. All right, anyway. So Hynek's writing a bunch of gibberish, and I'm assuming it's math on napkins, and he's pretty absorbed in what he's doing. So Quinn heads up to pay and sees some guy reading a newspaper talking about flying saucers in the dogfight. He uses it as the opportunity to start entering his recently decided conclusion into the public conversation with the people around him, making sure that they can all hear him. As he comes back, Quinn plays the song, How High the Moon, on the jukebox. And Hynek starts a conversation and immediately diverts from the math he was going to talk about and then diverts into a conversation of the song. But let's stop for a second. Jukeboxes. The jukebox was a thing for a long time. Basically, until the era of CDs. Era of CDs. Now, we have to pay $1 at streaming jukeboxes today. But they just aren't as cool as dropping a quarter, pressing a button, watching a machine select a record, set it down, and drop the needle. I don't know. Maybe that makes me a bit hipstery. I'm not a hipster, but, it's whatever. But I feel like there's something... Modern jukeboxes are so clearly superior to the old jukeboxes, but there's just this feeling with them. They don't have the audio clarity. I get it. They don't have the selection. I don't care. I like old jukeboxes, and I want to get one filled with the old 50s records. In fact, hold on. I'm going to be right back. I'm going to look for something real quick. Okay, wow. There's a bunch out there. The jukeboxes, sorry. Most don't work, it looks like. But the 1948 Wurlitzer model 1100, so 1100, is $3,400 freaking dollars. That's crazy. I was thinking I don't know, $500. Man, I was way off. But how cool would that be to have a freaking jukebox? Okay, so Professor Hynek starts talking about lumens and math to Quinn, and Quinn obviously doesn't follow. It's here that Hynek recognizes the song that Quinn is playing on the jukebox, and then draws a correlation between Fuller's statement and Quinn's action in relation to that particular song. Specifically, that Fuller felt like he was in danger when that song came on, implying that subconsciously Quinn maybe feels like they are in some sort of danger. I'm not 100% on what is being implied here technically by Hynek, but I'm not even sure that he knows. But it's another link in a chain that doesn't make sense for him, and as a result us. I think, I don't know, that the only thing that's clear to me at this point is that he knows that things aren't adding up. So I'm willing to go along with it. Quinn, more or less, sums it up when he says, I don't know what you're getting at here, but song, no song, it was a weather balloon. This goes right back to Quinn's introduction, where he's trying to get to the Pentagon, to Washington, D.C., and he just wants to get this stuff knocked out so he can have the reports under his name. This jogs Hynek out of his ADHD curiosity moment and back to the lumens with the weather balloon and napkin math. Quinn and Hynek have a bit of a back and forth on what's reasonable and what isn't when Hynek tosses out a challenge. Take him up. Prove him wrong. Next thing we know, we've got Quinn grabbing Hynek's crotch zipper on his flight suit and zipping him up while we discuss Fuller's reported flight maneuvers before they go to recreate them. It's here we're introduced with to the fact that Hynek essentially has what do they call that? It's not, is it eidetic memory? Basically, he can remember everything he sees. And then they, right before they go up, they skip us back to Mimi and Susie, who's drinking tea, sans sticking out the little pinky. Mimi tries on the dress, and Susie loves it. I'm putting it out, supporting my scissor idea. You know, scissors, dresses, it's good. Unlike the other outfits, or even the one that Susie is currently wearing, I think my guy sense kicks in here, and I don't quite know what I'm looking at. So I don't know if you're female and you watched it. If you love the dress, let me know. I mean, to me, it was a dress. I kind of like the 50s garb a little bit more. That dress looks kind of like it could have been randomly plucked from any time period. I don't know. I mean, don't get me wrong. She looks good in it, but I kind of preferred her other clothes. This is one of those instances where, as a guy, I guess I just don't get it. Where women at home like, wow, I don't know. Okay, so anyway, I guess that's fine. Dress is a dress to me. But Susie drops some more sort of comments about how she envies her husband. So, okay, is this shallow that I'm such a chauvinist? Because if without context, I guess it sounds like I'm a chauvinist. The scissor comments are from Mr. Garrison in South Park. Like I find that episode hilarious, and anytime there's even a hint in any other TV show or movie, I start yelling scissor. Just, you know, it's a callback to South Park. So don't think that I'm just some like fucking crazy dog. Whatever. I guess it doesn't matter. And we're in the sky. So Hynek and Quinn exchange some dialogue. Hynek asks Quinn pretty point blank if he's ever even seen anything. Quinn talks about how other pilots have seen lights. They call them Foo Fighters. Great band. And he hasn't. Then we see the weather balloon. And this is something I really like about the show. I've talked about it a couple times now, but this weather balloon, the light color is the exact same hue as the UFO from the beginning of the episode. So now as a viewer, you're like, oh, well, shit, maybe it was a weather balloon. Now, obviously, I don't think anybody who watches the show is going to be like, oh, it's a weather balloon. But I like that they put the detail in to create the question. Like Quinn and Hynek, they never saw the color of the UFO, but us as viewers, we did. And they made sure that that light on the weather balloon was the exact same shade or hue as the beginning. So now they go in, they start reenacting the maneuvers that Fuller claims happened. In doing so, they clip the weather balloon and crash. This basically verified what Quinn thinks. Coming to, Hynek takes in the wreckage a little bit, and while trying to kind of get his bearings, get a hold of himself, he sees a dark shape with a black hat. Right away, in our very first episode, we meet up with Agent K from Men in Black. Then he passes out. Waking up, Hynek is, admittedly, not in the best of moods when he sees Quinn. And they're back and forth. Hynek makes an observation, which is wrong, stating that maybe the Air Force wanted him involved because Quinn lets things slide. In reality, the opposite is true. That we know as viewers that the opposite is true. But we're introduced here to the idea that even though Hynek is super, super smart, even though he, was able to talk about satellites and stuff that we know is going to come to pass, he's not going to be right about everything in this show. That would be ridiculous. So they show him as being fallible, which is great. He believes that the government is still honest, that the people who've given him the assignment with Project Blue Book are noble in their intentions. It'll be interesting to watch how his stance changes over time as part of his character arc. When Hynek gets up to call his wife, he notices Fuller is in the hospital, so he decides to go to room 118 and see him. This is Fuller in a nutshell right now, and I think this is going to be great as we sort of start to put those doubts in his mind over the show. I think that's going to be fun to watch how it unfolds. All right, so snap back to the Hynek household, where Mini Hynek is getting stressed out watching the news. I can relate, young man. I hate the news as well. I think it just pisses people off. The people who want their 2 minutes hate every day, they get off on watching that. I understand why he was getting stressed out. In this case, it was result of like air raids drills in Spokane, Washington. This will trigger a parental response with Mimi to make her son feel more safe with Big Daddy H out running around. The footage looks like it was taken from a air raid drill from Spokane in 1954. So it's from the time period, but apparently the Heineck television can watch future television. I don't know. I'm sure that they probably didn't think anybody would be doing what I just did and look all the details up, but whatever. All right, so General Mean Guy stops by and berates Quinn, states clearly what he expects of Quinn. And this lines up with what Quinn wanted to do at the start of the show. But now Quinn is being told that's what he's going to do, which changes the dynamic a little bit. Now it's not Quinn's ambition that's going to be chasing, closing out the reports really quickly. I mean, it is, but now there's this doubt put in Quinn's mind as to what they're asking from him here. So he states to him he wants him writing reports, closing cases. And the other thing I love here is that it came right on the heels of Heineck's misled intention that he was there to ensure the investigations are thorough. We see what kind of situation now that Quinn is caught in. And I think, really, once you see the general turn around, it registers on Quinn's face what is happening. And I think it's a really good moment for him. So Heineck pops in, talks to Fuller, and, invariably they talk about the encounter. Heineck points out that they were replicating what Fuller claims he did, and Fuller corrects him. Now, we weren't privy to the entire conversation between Quinn and Fuller. We got snippets, and then Quinn's interpretation of the conversation. Fuller states it wasn't actually him controlling the plane, that the plane flew that way. This catches Heineck off guard. I mean, as a viewer, I was like, yo, what? So as they continue their conversation, Heineck continues to try and provide reasonable explanations to the details that Fuller's providing. And then the general overhears them as Fuller's talking about the radio station coming in from his hometown. Quick aside, the radio station KKJH in San Diego has no historical record according to http://www.tangentsunset.com/radiosandiego.htm. That was, man, saying website addresses verbally sucks. All right. Doesn't mean it's not based on a real radio station. I just didn't find anything on it. Probably a fabrication for the show. We're left with a single statement. Logic can't begin to explain what we're dealing with here. This is going to fly in the face of everything that Heineck has built his life around as a scientist. And I think it really sets the stage for the stories to come. Oh my God. This is taking longer than I thought it would. Maybe I put too many details in. Okay, so Heineck and Quinn leave the hospital, with Quinn informing Heineck that he has to fly back to DC because DC's pissed, presumably about the crashed military aircraft. Heineck offers to write the report, but Quinn said it's already done. It's already been sent. They get in a little, lovers' quarrel where Heineck starts pointing out the details that were not in the report, presumably, and Quinn interrupts him and completes the details that Heineck thinks he would have missed. Quinn points out that combat pilots have stress reactions. They hear things, they see things. He didn't want to add that to the report because it would have left the report open for no reason. Because the truth isn't good enough, Heineck observes. Quinn leaves it open-ended and walks off. So it's clear that Quinn doesn't want to give that an answer because I think after his conversation with the general, even he's not sure. He just knows that he doesn't want to impede his career and his course to the Washington, D.C., but at the same time, I do think Quinn's an honest guy. I don't think he's going to lie necessarily. So this is a weird place for him to be with Heineck, who this is for their first thing together, their first investigation together. So it is a weird place. And this leaves Heineck a lot of time to think on his way home. As he's driving home, a black car shows up and the radio goes fuzzy. But again, just a sign of good storytelling, they set up just seconds before that he's in a bad radio reception area. So back in the 50s, we didn't have Wi-Fi coverage and super powerful FM radio signals everywhere, digital, all this other stuff. It's completely reasonable that due to his location, he was having bad reception in that area, and the radio noise is from a weak radio signal coming through very strangely, and has nothing to do with the arrival of the black car. Or does it? I love that they leave it just at that area where it could go either way. So, anyway, let's see. Car, taps him on the back end to get his attention. A little knocking at the back door action. Hynek sees the outline and recalls the shape of the plane, the shape of the person with the hat that he saw at the plane crash. And just as he registers those details, the car turns off at some abandoned theme park. Not creepy at all. So this part I initially found confusing, just in that little 30 seconds that we were watching, because at first it seemed like the car was going to try to run him off the road. Who knows, potentially kill the guy. But then the car turns off. Super confusing for 10 seconds. But it gets cleared up pretty quick when Hynek goes after him and is led to this sort of lab, for lack of a better term, with a projector showing these weird symbols paired with what sounds like kid's voice, like some kid's voice reading off numbers. Here we get some dialogue from General Meanie Face and his buddy about the encounter, overlapped with the lab scenes, talking about a potential new candidate. Candidate for what? The program. Whatever that is. And we're home. We have this charming little conversation about duck and cover drills, slightly paranoid. Then Hynek chases down some details about the radio station. He finds out the song, How High the Moon, was actually playing at 8:15 on March 3rd. Guess what? Lines up with what Fuller tells him. Okay, so this is another weird little detail that doesn't add up. Hynek relays to Quinn and is on the edge of telling him about what he's found, but in a turnaround from earlier, he pulls back. And I love this because this is the first little seeds of doubt. Already in the first episode, right near the end, little seeds of doubt. Who should he trust? It's starting to sink in for him. Looking at his notes, thinking about the shape, the theme park, the lab, he decides instead to pull back. But Quinn notices the hesitation. So, as we wrap up the first episode, we get Mimi and Alan in front of their house picking up some toys, and somebody's taking pictures of them. Who's that somebody? Susie. So is it Nathan's scissors theory, or is it something else? Let's turn up the paranoia a little more. And if that weren't enough, we close with Fuller getting drugged and taken, followed by the generals, confirming that it's done. What the F does that mean? A crazy, crazy start. Loved it. I think I watched this episode probably 5 times back to back, just because I was like, this is awesome. I was so freaking pumped. It's really what made me decide to do the podcast, because it was just such a good episode. I haven't watched a show where I watched the first episode 5 times in a long time. We're talking, well, I mean, honestly, probably X-Files was the last one that did this to me. So I loved it. So this is the first episode. I plan to set up a Patreon account. I have breaks built in just in case people want to put some ads in, some other podcasts, stuff like that. I would like to plug what History Channel already has. So this is my podcast, but the History Channel has an official podcast where they actually interview the actors, directors, writers, producers of the show. And if you go to History Channel's website for Project Blue Book, they actually have little sub-documentaries about the real-life stories that inspired that particular episode from the Project Blue Book files themselves. So definitely cool, definitely worth checking out. Please go do so.